which brings together the Climate Club member governments as well as stakeholders from the donor community, including the IFIs, but also different investors from institutional investors as well as philanthropies. So it's a bigger group than just the Climate Club members. We've shared a draft version of this report on the 10th of June with all the participants. That was already reviewed in the first body of members meeting of the Climate Club on 23rd of April. And the report, where you will hear more details of its outcomes, is available for your feedback until 3rd of July. The plan is to finalize it by September at the margins of the second Climate Club body of members meeting. A few points on this report and why we give so much importance to it. It's the first ever done mapping of financial and technical if the colleagues could mute themselves, thank you. It's the first ever done mapping of technical and financial assistance to industry decarbonization in emerging markets and developing economies. So far, no analysis assessment have looked at this. The report explores the trends in the past 2 decades, so it has a retrospective angle. It also shows what's on the offer today. So if a country would like to seek some assistance, it can find through this report where sources from public and private sources exist. Now, it shows the needs and gaps to financing and assistance in emerging markets and developing economies, but it also shows ways of how to scale up and where assistance should focus more on. So the needs and gaps also. This is a standalone report, so it will be issued as a Climate Club report in September, but it also provides inputs to Climate Club's global matchmaking platform. You'll hear more about that in the later minutes of this meeting by my colleagues from the UNIDO, who is also the Secretariat of the Climate Club Global Matchmaking Platform. Now, before we dive into the details of the report and the findings, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Sebastian from the government of Chile, the co-chair of the Climate Club, together with Germany, to deliver the joint opening remarks on behalf of both co-chairs. Thank you very much. And Sebastian, over to you.
Thank you, Dager, as always. Welcome everyone on both co-chairs, Chile and Germany. I welcome the representatives of international finance institutions, philanthropies and institutional investors, as well as members of the Climate Club, of course, and the interim secretariat of the Climate Club and the team of the OECD working on the mapping report. Emerging economies and developing economies, as my own country, will play a leading role in for the successful climate action and in the decarbonization of the industry in the future. The Climate Club is an inclusive intergovernmental forum that aims at, among other things, enhancing multi and bilateral cooperation between members, demonstrating solidarity. Pillar 3 of the Climate Club aims exactly at this, boosting international climate cooperation and partnerships to improve the enabling environment for industry decarbonization in emerging economies and developing countries, with a focus on to leverage public finance and the necessary complementary technical assistance and facilitating the mobilization of private finance for industry decarbonization. The centerpiece of this year's work under the Pillar 3 is the development of the Global Matchmaking Platform, or GMP, which aims to accelerate and coordinate international support efforts for emerging markets and developing economies, or ENDEs, The GMP is currently under development, supported by a secretariat provided by UNIDO. Special thanks to them for this and for providing an update of the GMP later in today's session. We know that improved financial and technical assistance is needed to help to ensure the deployment to key technologies and infrastructure, especially in E&Ds, where the biggest industrial growth in the next decade is expected to happen. We also see that growing numbers of international funding of organizations, institutions, funds, and philanthropies are developing programs and projects towards industry decarbonization, including technical assistance, of course. Yet currently available support is insufficient. We will be working together with key stakeholders such as public and private providers of funding that are here today, governments as well as private sectors, to tackle this endeavor. Today's discussion of the draft report mapping financial and technical assistance for industry decarbonization in emerging markets and developing economies, developed by the OECD team, will be crucial for continued joint work. The mapping report provides an overview of current financial and technical assistance landscape and constitutes the first ever mapping on financial and technical assistance to industry decarbonization and EMDs undertaken by Climate Club. Today, we would like to receive your, the international funding institutions, philanthropy, and institutional investors, of course, feedback on the findings of the mapping report, and jointly discuss the financing gaps and where more effective and efficiently use of public finance and technical assistance is needed. Today's exchange will feed into the further refinement of the report. It will also inform the further development of the GMP and inform the discussions among Climate Club members on how to boost international climate cooperation and partnerships to accelerate industry decarbonization, as well as the preparation of the Climate Club work program for 2025 and 2026. The industrial sector is not only a significant contributor of the global economy, but also a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. Roughly a third of all GHGs emissions can be attributed to industry if indirect emissions are also included. Therefore, the full decarbonization of the industry is crucial to keep global warming in the range agreed in the Paris Agreement. To keep in line with this Paris Agreement, efforts in all countries are needed. The Climate Club was created to increase collective action to accelerate the necessary transformation. One of the main challenges is to move from incremental energy efficiency measures, which are of course important, to more transformative, disruptive approaches needed for a full decarbonization of the industry. This report will provide crucial insights for the global matchmaking platform by not only demonstrating the finance gaps and needs, but also by mapping existing financial flows, actors, programs on industry decarbonization. Some of these actors are potential stakeholders for the GMP, and we would like to call on donors community to support efforts of the GMP, of course. The different modules of Pillar 3 of the Climate Club, the mapping presented today, case studies on innovative financial instruments, and the GMP complement and build on each other. The concept of the GMP is to match-make government requests with the available offer of technical and financial assistance to align industry with the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. The GMP will function at the intersection of financing, technology, policy, and implementation, with the aim to catalyze decarbonization efforts in heavy industries across the EMDs. The idea of the GMP is not to set up a completely new support infrastructure, but to utilize the strengths of international partnerships as well as existing and potentially new instruments to deploy resources at the speed at speed and scale. A crucial milestone towards decarbonization is the next NDC cycle before COP30 in 2025. All parties of the Paris Agreement need to submit new NDCs with concrete targets. As the investment cycles of industry usually cover several decades, this round of the NDCs might be the last one to shift gears for net zero by mid-century. These NDCs, therefore, should include ambitious and robust sections on industry and also mid and long-term planning. Actions required for industrial decarbonization should be defined. For the development and implementation of these new NDCs, especially in developing countries and emerging economies, it is needed to receive more support, and this can be coordinated through the GMP of the Climate Club. I want to thank the Climate Club Interim Secretariat and UNIDO for collaborating and organizing this technical meeting. So once again, thank you, and I'm looking forward for the discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, for these very kind opening remarks. Just to remind the housekeeping rules for renaming ourselves, which most of you did. Thank you for that. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a recorded session, but this is an open session also. This is a technical meeting, and the team at OECD really require your inputs, your critical feedback to finalize this work and also to craft the recommendations that come out of it. So we very much look forward to your suggestions. And finally, during the discussion session, please raise your hand button, use that to indicate your intervention need. And also, we kindly ask you to keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. So I hand over to the OECD team here, to my colleague Cecile, for delivering the presentation of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction, and a warm welcome also on my side to all participants. We are very pleased to share the insight of this report on the mapping of financial and technical assistance for industry decarbonization in emerging markets and developing economies. And let me quickly remind that this module, so Module 1, is part of the Pillar 3, as we said, of the Climate Club work program, boosting international cooperation partnerships. This module complements the other modules, as it has also been mentioned, of the pillars, so Module 2 and Module 3, with the global matchmaking platform, which we will hear about later in the meeting. And so it is in that spirit of boosting international cooperation and partnership that we hope through this meeting to hear from your insights on the finding of the report, and also to provide this opportunity to facilitate the discussion between the different stakeholder groups that are represented today. So, as an introduction, what is at stake when it comes to financing industry decarbonization? We have global investment in low carbon technologies for industry decarbonization that needs to increase by a factor 3 to 5 by 2030 to align industrial emission with net zero pathways. So first, it's really a matter of scale. And this investment will require various sources of financing: public, private, domestic, international. And for EMDs, the challenge is even more pronounced, as the manufacturing industry capacity is growing and is expected to continue growing in this country for economic development, and at the same time should decarbonize. And so this means that identifying where the financing needs and gaps lies is crucial to ensure that this investment, the financial and technical assistance, are designed and channeled in a way which can indeed contribute to an effective industry decarbonization in these countries, and including through international cooperation. And so that this directly links to the mapping and this objective. So why this mapping? What we aim to do is to identify the key trends on the state of play of financial and technical assistance for industry decarbonization in EMDs. So we try to look at what about the scale of the financing and technical assistance that has been provided so far, but also what type of financing instrument has been used, what type of support, and also what type of project have been targeted so far. And we conducted this mapping to inform areas for action through this finding, and including to inform the GMP, as it has been mentioned, particular on which programs and funds could indeed support industry decarbonization in this country. And I would like to highlight that it's really about drawing trends and key insights to inform action and for cooperation. And it's not about tracking progress towards climate finance objectives. So it's something which is indeed tracked in other instances at a broader level. But this mapping is not about tracking progress on climate finance. So next slide. So now, what does the mapping cover? So just so that we know what is the scope of the mapping. So first, in terms of sector, the mapping focuses on 3 industry subsectors: the steel, cement, and chemicals. So these are subsectors of relevance first from a decarbonization perspective, because they represent together 70% of global industry CO2 emission. It's also there are also subsectors of interest from a financing perspective, because these industry subsectors are capital intensive, require high investment, and highly rely on breakthrough technology, which also ask for high investment. So definitely relevant from a financing perspective. And third, they're also relevant from the EMD's angle of the mapping, because as we said, capacity is mostly growing in these countries, and most of the capacity worldwide is operating in EMDs. So the mapping covers different types of sources of financial and technical assistance toward EMDs. Public sources, namely bilateral and multilateral support towards EMDs, which was the initial scope of the mapping. And then we expanded to other sources of support, so beyond the public sector, to gain more insight on the private finance mobilized, and also insights on institutional investors and philanthropies. And for each one of these building blocks, each one of these sources, we looked at to what extent these sources of financial and technical assistance cover or have targeted the steel, cement, and chemical sectors. And because of this targeted focus, as we say, on these 3 specific industry subsectors, it constitutes a unique mapping for industry decarbonization. And as we introduced the first mapping specifically focusing on this sector related to financing sources. So now a few words about how the mapping was built. So we used a wide range of data and information depending on the type of financial and technical assistance we were looking at. So in some cases, we could, for instance, rely on very detailed information. So typical example mentioned here is OECD data from the Development Assistance Committee and Creditor Reporting System, so that we call DAC-CRS. And this includes, just to give an example, it includes over 8,000 project-level transactions a year. So very detailed information. In other cases, we had to conduct very bottom-up analysis and research from project database, annual report, or individual website. So very different types of input and information. And this was completed by some interviews that we conducted with some IFIs, fund, also philanthropy. And so I take this opportunity also to thank the stakeholder we discussed with, who have participated to this interview and shared their insight all along the report. But in any case, it's important to highlight that these differences that we see in terms of sources are actually the result of data availability. And it's something we'll discuss just right now. So before digging into the findings of each building block that are specific to each of these building blocks of the mapping, here we present 6 insights that we draw across the different categories. So meaning whether we talk about public, bilateral, multilateral, or private finance mobilized, for instance, because there are commonalities across these sources. What we found, for instance, so first insight, as I said, it's about data. Available data on financial and technical assistance for industry decarbonization in EMDs is very scarce and scattered. Second, financial and technical assistance for industry decarbonization in EMDs have been overlooked so far. We saw very little support received for this sector, and we'll see that in detail in a few slides. Third, when we look at what is provided, we see that there is room to tap into a wider range of providers, to target more recipient countries, to use more types of financing instruments. So it's also a matter of diversification. And there is also room to target implementation projects and projects implying deep emission reduction. So that's the fourth key finding. In terms of fund and program, what we see that there are various funds and programs which can cover industry decarbonization for EMDs, but these funds and programs are not necessarily targeted toward industry itself, meaning that most of them actually are transverse or cover many sectors. And finally, what we also highlighted in the report and last insight and very good news is that there is a growing interest in developing funds and programs for industry decarbonization. So it's a new space, it is emerging. And so it also means that there is an opportunity here in terms of international collaboration and partnership to learn from these key findings, to take these key findings and from the state of play to design or channel financing and technical assistance in a way that could indeed foster industry decarbonization in these countries. So moving specifically on the data challenges that we mentioned. So I just said data on financial and technical assistance for industry decarbonization is scarce. And it is scattered because there is no single source of data which can capture the full scope of the mapping that we envision. And even if we look at specific sources, specific type of support, public or private finance mobilized, there is not a single source of data that can be used. It's about data availability, so I said, but it's also about data granularity. And actually, data on financial and technical assistance that we found is for the industry sector in general is very limited, and even more limited when we try to look at subsector levels of steel, cement, and chemicals in particular. In addition of this, so there are also differences in terms of scope and methodology across the data and across the existing analysis and report, which actually prevent us also from doing any direct comparison across the result or across amount. So there's also a matter of methodology. And finally, data transparency and confidentiality, of course, brought further challenge to try to establish such a mapping and to establish a comprehensive mapping. So if we move now to the first building block of the mapping, so about the public bilateral and multilateral support, these are results that have been indeed presented during the first body of member meeting a few months ago. So for that public bilateral and multilateral support analysis, we used very detailed data from the OECD DAC-CRS database, as said. And it shows that the steel, cement, and chemical sector actually received very limited support for decarbonization purposes. So to give an order of magnitude, we estimate in these three sectors together received around $1 billion US from the mitigation-related development finance in total in 20 years. So that's the order of magnitude. But beyond this amount itself, very important and most importantly is to put this into perspective. So what does it represent? And actually, we saw that it is much less than 1% of the total mitigation-related development finance, which has been provided to all sectors, so beyond industry, on the same period, so over this 20-year period. So that means that the steel, cement, and chemical sector have indeed been overlooked, representing a very, very small share of the total support across sector, while representing 70% of global industry CO2 emission, as previously mentioned. If we look now at the characteristic of the financial flows, so not the amount, but really the characteristic of the flows that have been provided so far, there are also key insights that can be drawn, because we saw that these flows are characterized by a very limited pool of providers, very limited pool of recipient and type of financing instrument. For instance, we saw that almost all the support came from multilateral providers, 80% of the total support was provided by one provider. Same for the recipient. We had 2 countries accounting for 80% of the amount received. Same for the type of financing instrument, highly represented by debt instrument. So very little diversification. So that means also that there are opportunities for these 3 subsectors to potentially benefit from other dozens of country providers that have benefited other sectors, for instance, and also the potential to benefit from other type of financing instrument, for instance, and target specifically region and country where manufacturing capacity industry is growing. And finally, and equally important, recipient projects are focused so far on incremental emission reduction and not on disruptive approach and deep emission reduction aligned with net zero pathway. So that's also a key insight to have in mind when it comes to the characteristic of the support. Beyond these 3 sectors themselves, so to complement this view on these 3 sectors, we also looked from a different perspective and more precisely on cross-cutting technology. So 2 cross-cutting technologies, which are key enabler for decarbonization of the steel, cement, and chemical sector. So namely the clean hydrogen and carbon capture, utilization and storage, so CCUS. And for this technology, so it is indeed widely acknowledged also that technology transfers as innovative technology will be needed towards EMDs to decarbonize. However, what we see for these technologies is that, again, under the same period, so 2021, the flows that have been directed to CCUS and clean hydrogen have been equally very limited. So it's about 150 million over the past 20 years. And again, same insight, I mean, very little diversification in terms of type of provider, financial instrument, and again, the support has not been driven toward project implementation. So that was for the public bilateral and multilateral support. And now if we move toward the private sources of financing, so we looked first at the private finance mobilized from official development finance intervention, indeed in EMD, always for the 3 sectors, so steel, cement, and chemicals, and still building on the detailed data from the OECD DAC-CRS database. But here, in that case, the granular data is available for a different period. So here we're talking about from 2012 to 2020. Actually, the first insight is that public bilateral and multilateral support has indeed triggered private finance mobilization for these 3 sectors, for the decarbonization of the 3 sectors. And looking again at the amount, so it's about $1 billion US, which has been mobilized between 2012 and 2020 for this purpose. But again, if we put this amount into perspective, it represents less than 1% of the total mitigation-related private finance mobilized on the same period for all sectors, so beyond industry. So again, as we saw for the public support, these 3 sectors represent a very small share of the total private finance mobilized again. And same idea, if we look at the characteristics of the support, the private finance mobilized, here we see that, again, there is an opportunity to tap into a wider range of provider and recipient country. We saw almost all the private finance mobilized coming from multilateral providers. 3 providers represented almost 80% of the total amount mobilized. Same for the type of recipient country. We see a mix of recipient countries. However, they were not targeting the major manufacturing countries. So there is also space to diversify the recipient country. And in terms of financing instrument, here the conclusion is slightly different from the public support, because here we saw a relatively diversified instrument use, so syndicated loan, direct investment in companies and SPV, or co-financing and guarantees. Next slide. So we looked at so far what has been provided so far from public bilateral, multilateral support and private finance mobilized. Now we look at from a different perspective and look at what are the existing channels of funds an IFIs program, which could cover industry decarbonization in EMDs. And to do that, we used the Climate Fund Explorer of NDC partnerships, which gather around funds that are target climate change mitigation, adaptation, or wider objective of resilience and sustainable development. And we analyze for each fund reported in this database to see to what extent they cover or not the industry sector. And actually what we found is that there are various funds which could in theory indeed support decarbonization project for industry. So we identified around 20 funds that can cover industry, but these funds do not cover the industry sector in the same way. So for instance, we saw that nearly half of these funds were fully transverse funds, meaning that they do not target specifically any sector. And so, for instance, they are associated to a general purpose of supporting climate goals or sustainable development. So industry decarbonization project could fit into these funds, but the scope coverage of these funds and program is by definition significantly wider. And we saw about 1/3 of this fund which closely consider the industry sector, but also from a wider perspective, meaning that in that case, industry sector is linked to the objective or to the category applying to the fund, for instance, if it's about innovative technologies, infrastructure, or energy efficiency. And in the end, there was only nearly 20% of the funds that we found closely considering the industry sector, in the sense that industry was specifically mentioned as one of the few targeted sectors. So that was, these findings. And it means that most of the funds which can cover industry decarbonization are transverse. And so this could constitute a challenge when considering this type of fund, because it means that the industry-related projects may have to compete with other type of project of a very different nature, for instance, focusing on transport or on land use, so very different from industry to access these funds. And as we know, the specific financing challenges that are related to industry decarbonization project, in particular for this emission-intensive subsector, this could constitute a challenge to access the fund, as they may have to compete with very different type of projects. So that's for the funds. And to complement, so we looked at specifically some IFI program based on a sample also, to see to what extent, again, they cover industry in the program, based notably on the available project database of each IFIs. And from this sample, what we see is that almost all of the IFI cover indeed in the industry sector in their portfolios. More than half of them have decarbonization project and focus on decarbonization. And then if we move to the next level, looking at if there are projects based on breakthrough technology and deep emission reduction, then we have less than half of the IFI program that we analyze that indeed cover this type of project. So this is to say that most IFI indeed cover industry, but near zero emission aligned project is still a nascent space and emerging. Next slide. So as I said, this type of project are growing, and it indeed has been confirmed through some interviews that we have conducted with stakeholders from IFI and fund, where we found indeed that there is this growing interest in developing specific funds and programs for industry decarbonization in EMDs. So that had been confirmed indeed. And here we present a few key findings of this interview, mostly focusing on financing instrument aspect. So what we draw from the discussion is that there is indeed a mix of financing instruments which can be used depending on the project specificities. But we saw that concessional loans were indeed reported as the most widely used type of instrument. De-risking instruments were considered as a very valuable tool by IFI for industry decarbonization project, and specifically guarantees was mentioned. And when talking about innovative financing instruments, or relevant instrument for this type of project. We heard about blended finance, so blended finance and concessional loan, again, were reported as the most relevant tools to support such project. And finally, in terms of barriers toward industry decarbonization project in EMDs, the lack of project pipeline and market risk were the critical barriers that were the most reported through this interview with IFI. The last part of the mapping, so we changed type of stakeholders, so we focus on insights from the sources and stakeholders that go beyond the public sector indeed, and which can contribute to industry decarbonization in EMDs. And so we looked at institutional investors. Why institutional investors are important for this discussion is because they have indeed the potential to advance sustainable development given their asset value. So it's about hundreds of trillions in assets in OECD countries alone. And which means that, and that's a key finding from previous OECD report, that only a few percent of these hundreds of trillions, so less than 4%, could be actually sufficient to fill the financing gap which is required for sustainable development in general. So there's a huge potential from this stakeholder. But also according to previous OECD survey, we found that institutional investors indeed little invest in EMDs because they tend to invest in low-risk markets. So there is a huge potential, but yes, very little investment happening in that region. So we tried to see to what extent institutional investors consider manufacturing industries such as steel, cement, and chemicals in their portfolio. But here, publicly available data or information available was very scarce again. So to try to find some insight, we based our analysis on a sample of pension funds, so around 30 pension funds, which include the biggest pension fund in the top 10, and also pension fund that invest in EMDs, so that we could have specific insight on this region. And with publicly available information, we could see that they indeed do have holdings in manufacturing industries such as steel, cement, and chemical. And they do invest via foreign and domestic equity, but information are not sufficient to see if there could be indeed a direct or indirect link with potential decarbonization consideration. However, another trend which is highlighted is that most institutional investors and pension funds analyzed here considered ESG approach actually within their investment practice. And so these approaches could indeed play an increasing role in investment decision and drive support towards decarbonization consideration. In particular, to ensure that alignment of the portfolio with decarbonization effort and net zero pathway. And this is a trend indeed which can be also seen through institutional-led initiatives like the Climate Action 100+ or Asian Investor Group on Climate Change Principle for Responsible Investment that we discussed with, where there is an emerging trend in trying to link with sustainability aspects. Last slide. And finally, another type of sources and stakeholders that we'll look at was about philanthropies. So philanthropies as another stream which can indeed contribute to support industry decarbonization in EMDs by also raising awareness, so support and provide assistance. Again, we started with existing analysis, so both from the OECD and Climate Work, so global analysis, which shows that industry sector again represent a small share of the climate-related funding from philanthropies, and so a few percent. And so this directly echoes to the type of conclusion that we have highlighted for other public sources, for instance, or private finance mobilized, that industry is overlooked when compared to other sectors. For that part on philanthropies, we again constitute a sample of grant opportunities. So around 40 grant opportunities were analyzed, and we try to see indeed how they cover industry decarbonization. Again, data availability and granularity make it difficult to draw conclusion on specific financial assistance for these specific three sectors and for these regions, EMDs. And in that specific case, what we found in terms of order of magnitude is a total of 48 million USD since 2020 identified as focusing on industry decarbonization. But again, in terms of characteristic, interesting to see that the focus were not necessarily on project implementation. And when it comes to region and geography, Asia and the EU received the most amount of the grant opportunity that we saw. So again, there is further, wider range of recipient countries, further targeting recipient countries. So I stop here for the detailed analysis. In terms of next step and perspective, we mentioned that next step would be written feedback and final report on September. But I would like to conclude also that through these findings and through the different findings that we presented, we can see that tracking financial and technical assistance for industry decarbonization in EMDs would require actually establish a common and fit-for-purpose framework where Climate Club could play a leading role. So it's something that we could take into consideration also for future discussion about the needs, broader consideration on this mapping. So thank you very much. I stop here and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Cécile. Very detailed, thorough presentation of this report. Now, we have about 40 minutes for open discussion. We have shared in advance a number of guiding questions for specifically for IFIs, philanthropies, and institutional investors, as well as also a number of questions for the Climate Club member governments. But before we dive into these, I'd like to open the floor for any comments or question to the report and the findings itself. It's at the end of the day a technical work, and we're curious to hear if you have any specific questions. And I see one in the chat from my colleague at the IFC. I'll just read that out, Cécile. Please, is there any particular reason for using 2000 and 2021 as the baseline period? Do we have data for 2022 and 2023?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think this refers indeed to the very detailed data on public bilateral and multilateral support, as well as private finance mobilized, so based on OECD data. Actually, it's really a matter of data availability, so what was available when we started the analysis. For the private finance mobilized, it was until this year. And for the public, there may be some updates indeed, because these data are updated. But when we did if it's updated, it's 1 year later, so it would cover 2022, but not 2023 again. So to answer to the question, it was really about what was available when we started the mapping, so namely end of last year.
Thank you, Cécile, for the clarification. Now, when we were doing this analysis, actually, as Cécile mentioned, the report and the work have received a lot of feedback and guidance from a number of IFIs and also from various organizations, institutional investors who are also present today at this meeting. CIF, the EBRD, IFC, Jeff. I also see colleagues from the IMF. And the Asia Investor Group on Climate Change is here. The Climate Works Foundation is here. The NDC Partnership is here, as well as colleagues from Lead It and the Mission Possible Partnership. So I'd like to turn to them to provide any comment and feedback to the work. But also we are displaying a number of questions here on the screen. The bottom line of the, let's say, the first 3 questions for different actors is, what is the action needed to mobilize assistance or the scale up assistance for financing and for technical assistance in EMDs for industry decarbonization. What is the priority? What is the need? What type of action do we need? So any views on those are very much welcomed. So I stop here, and please feel free to raise your hands. And I'll respond to that question on the chat also. But first of all, we are looking forward to hearing some remarks. So please raise your hand if you have any question, or if you want to comment on those questions which we raised. I see leaded Nadia. Yeah, please, Nadia.
Yes. Hey, here's Nadia Mondini from the Leadership for Industry Transition Secretariat. Can you hear me, by the way? Just making sure.
Yeah, all clear.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay. I wanted to first really thank Cecile and team for this really, really useful piece of research. I think we can all agree this is very needed and very, very helpful. LEADIT has, we have ourselves done similar research in the past in a lot less detail, but coming to very similar conclusions. I wanted to, I guess, reiterate or make a comment to reiterate a couple of the questions that we see here on the slide that we also ask ourselves in collaboration with our partners is what are the reasons why assistance, technical and financial assistance for industry decarbonization is not larger and more targeted, which can be a number, right? It can be conflicting priorities, it can be visibility of the topic, dependence on, as Cecile mentioned, breakthrough technology that is associated with substantial risk and perceived risk, availability of project pipelines. And then as a consequence of this, or like as a consequence of the answer to this question, what can the different international initiatives that are in place to work on accelerating assistance to industry decarbonization work together to provide, I guess, the information basis to inform reform processes towards scaling these instruments to the level that they're needed. So I guess just like reiterating, I think probably question 1 and 4 on this slide. And again, thank you very much to the team for this really, really helpful piece of research.
Thank you, Nadia. Cecile, would you like to respond to the EM?
No, thank you very much. I think that you framed the question and the challenge way. I mean, it's a aggregation of challenges that we heard from the interview, for instance, with IFIs and funds. So as you said, I mean, it's a little bit of a mix about project pipeline, risk, availability of technologies. So I mean, I think there is not a single answer, but it's really the aggregate of all of these, challenges. And as you said, actually, it echoes to the question we raised. So we are very keen to hear about a stakeholder here from IFI to further provide insight. But I think that, yes, it's really a matter of aggregation of all these challenges and not specifically one reason or one challenges that we heard from the discussion we previously had. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. I saw a hand from Mission Possible Partnership, and I saw Nadia Giuliani from Inarcasa turning on her video. Was that a hand raise, Nadia, also, or? Okay. Then if you'd like to intervene, please raise your hand, and I turn to my colleague from the Mission Possible Partnership.
Hello, thanks very much. And yeah, just reiterating what Nadia was saying before, very useful report, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to review and comment. Mark Moutinho here from the Mission Possible Partnership. And I wanted to pick up on something that was mentioned in the draft report and kind of relates to a few of these questions. And that is the observation that the project pipeline for the types of projects that we would want to see or we would want to support, particularly those that are focusing on breakthrough technologies, that this pipeline is not sufficiently strong enough for IFIs or other investors to get involved, essentially. And I just wanted to maybe clarify with the authors or also understand the IFI perspective, if it's a question of that there are projects that exist, but simply do not have a strong enough investment case to be eligible for financing or support, or if stakeholders aren't seeing a pipeline of projects at all, and if it's more a question of giving visibility to projects that do exist and possibly supporting them with technical assistance. Open question, very keen to hear perspectives from anyone on this.
Thank you. Very relevant question. As the authors, I think there is not an immediate answer, but we have a number of organizations here from the public sector. I see my colleague from EBRD and Dimitri. I see colleagues from SIF. I see colleagues from IFC, Jeff, and IMF. Would you like to respond to these two questions, actually, both from LEADED and MPP? They are both addressing the IFI aspect. So if I may just turn to them. Anyone from the...
Yeah,
from the
Dimitri here from the EBRD.
Yeah, Dimitri, please, go ahead.
Yes, so I guess there are three issues. The first is, since we're entering into the core of the decarbonization problem in the industrial sector, the technical assistance has to be analogous to that. That basically means that we're not doing simply energy efficiency, studies or just the basic optimization of production. We're doing a long-term strategic decarbonization plan, which costs money, right? And having a full alignment of that plan with the Paris alignment, verification, certification across costs, anything from 500,000 per company, per site, up to 1.5 million, right? Because these are very detailed and very expensive assignments, because at the end, they give a medium to long-term view, 5 to 10 years. So we don't have that technical assistance, basically. Basically, I don't have that money to give out 500,000 per company, right? And our modus operandi is that, the company has to contribute on a cost sharing agreement, 20-30% of that. So these are expensive assignments. The second is, once we do that, if we have the money and we do that in very rare occasions, then the company's commitment to long-term decarbonization, because the various uncertainties that they have in their decision-making process makes it difficult to commit beyond 4 or 5 years. So basically, they're going into a 5-year horizon. But then to go commit beyond the 5-year, they need strong incentives. And the only real incentives that matter is if it's a grant commitment or if it's further technical support, et cetera, et cetera. The analogous would be, just to give you an idea, in the world that we operate, if there's a innovation fund, similar to the EU, right? The EU Innovation Fund gives 40, 50, 60% grant, right? We don't have that money. I cannot ask a steel company or a cement company to do a 500, 600 million decarbonization projects, giving them peanuts, basically 5, 10 million CTF or GCF. They don't do it. It's simple as that. And the third is the policy element, the absence of a clear regulatory environment beyond the EU and the US. In the countries that we operate, we don't have that. And therefore, there's no price signal, there's no carbon price, there's no regulatory incentive for them to do anything apart just to do the bare minimum. We can elaborate on all these three areas in more detail, but I just like to give you the highlights. Other colleagues from other IFIs may jump in as needed.
Excellent, Dimitri, thank you. And very clear. I'd like to turn to other colleagues here from IFC. If there are any remarks you'd like to make, your already feedback in the preparation of the report was very helpful. Would you like to add anything on what the colleague from EBRD mentioned? Ose or Alexander? And I also turn to my colleague from Jeff. If there is anything to add, please, from IFC, Ose, please. Not clearly. Could you please try again?
Is it clear?
Not really. Sorry. Maybe we can try.
Could you switch off your video so that we can hear you well?
I think his video is already switched off. So, okay. Maybe we wait for a couple of minutes if you want to fix your connection, unless Alexander from also IFC wants to come in.
Nothing for me. I wait for Shane to connect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll wait for that. My colleague from Jeff, is there anything you'd like to add to this? And also my colleague from the IMF.
Hi, this is Taeyeon from the Global Environment Facility, the GEF. We have supported industry decarbonization past 30 years. Our support to countries have been there for a while through both grant through the government and blended finance instruments to mostly concessional finance to the private sector directly. But I think the biggest barrier for our support to the end users, the industry, is in our institutional complexity, because the access to the JEF finance is not easy. There's a lot of processes, and there's I think there's a huge bottleneck of our funding was there, but we have don't have a good pipeline of projects. But from the end user perspective, our money is not easy to access because there's a lot of processes they have to meet with, and most of our money is going through the government. That's also another bottleneck that has been barrier for them to access our money. So it's like both party has there's a missing in between that has linking our money to the end users. If that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. It's very helpful. Maybe we can try with Osei from IFC again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Thanks for the presentation, and thanks for the report. And we'll also look at it and provide written feedback as well. I think on the reasons why we are not, on the IFF from the IFS side, I think we also see quite a lot of what was described by my EBR, colleague. So we've been looking at this particular area, trying to put together some kind of program or strategy, especially looking at the hard-to-abate sectors. And like was mentioned, there are no incentives, there are no grants, there are no regulations, there are no policies. And what we've been trying to get is work out some kind of program, looking at the financing, looking at the technical assistance, and looking at how we can also, leverage or create green markets and carbon markets in some of those countries as well. And also, most of those countries are also countries that traditionally does not have access to concessional financings because they are looked at as middle income countries. And that's where you have most of the manufacturing base in some of these sectors. So it's also to make a case for, incentives that can help to unlock, some of the long-term decarbonization and transformative decarbonization projects. And the program we're looking at also is not going to look at more of the optimization. We are trying to see how to push the boundaries, what are the new technologies that can be leveraged, and what are the CCUS and the green hydrogen, and how can we unlock that as well. So that's been part of the work we've been doing. I think I shared that at the session that we have. And also looking at, do we need new instruments as well? Can we create new instruments to be able to unlock some of this? So it's quite some work there, but the challenges are there. But we also need quite a lot of support from this community, coming together to see how to go about it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Also to the IFC, who has already provided a lot of inputs to this work, and this adds to that. There are two hands being raised. Before I turn to my colleague from Asia Investor Group on climate change, perhaps I give the floor first to the IMF, and then Monica, it's over to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the report. It's very informative. I actually wanted to elaborate a little bit on Dmitri's point from EBRD. So IMF doesn't do the project financing, but where we can work is actually to help on more of a national policies level, because I think one of the most important reasons why there's not so much interest in this deep decarbonization projects is that there is uncertainty over whether the countries are actually aiming to reach the net zero, and if there is no clear price signal or no clear regulation and policy that this will be needed in the future, then there wouldn't be any interest from the investors to go into such risky behavior. So I suppose this is where different programs at the IMF can come into play. So for example, we do the Resilient Sustainability Trust, where we actually work with a lot of different stakeholders on putting the reform measures that the country can start changing their own policies to make sure that this will give a clear signal to all interested parties that yes, a country is thinking about climate, about mitigation and adaptation more seriously, and that opens opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very valuable feedback. Now, Monica, it's over to you, and then we'll have Paul Matthew from SIF. Monica, please go ahead. It's
Sorry, I thought you were calling on someone else.
no, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us here and for the dialogue as well. I'm very excited about the report. I do want to go back and kind of comment on some of the IFIs comments that were made just now, especially in line with what Dimitri had provided. So he had mentioned around the technical assistance and the scalability of that. I do want to raise that just around with our investors. These are institutional investors who are investing in Asia. We are thinking about industrial decarbonization, what that means for the sectors or different countries as well. And one of the areas is that we are looking at very much on the scalability angle. So if you're providing technical assistance per company, you are going to hit a scale element. Plus, some of the case studies, I would say, or examples that have come to the market of decarbonization, not specifically in these industries, because that has not yet happened, but in some other sectors where the case studies are not scalable. So it's a case study, but it's been kind of left as a case study that cannot be scaled. And you have to be quite careful, in my view, that you have to view this on a scale basis and sector basis as well. One of the areas that we are trying to do in connection to this and thinking about is how to bring in the sector pathways for each country. And by doing that, you can tie it back to the policies that's needed. And at the end of the day, when we talk about sectors, and we've looked at this from the industry view and with investors as well, even if you're talking about one sector, whether it's steel or one of the other sectors as well, if you go into the details of what's actually needed and scalable and doable in each of the markets, then the details actually really do matter and the discussions vary. So addressing to some of like your questions around number 3, what's actually needed and prioritized is there is lack of like technical detail, like almost like technology pathways that's viable in the sector in each market that can be discussed with the investors and policymakers. That's one element which joins the two together. And then, of course, the signaling from the policies is a huge push, whether it's incentives, stimulus, carbon pricing. So all of that is very much important. The other element on the question 4 on new financing instruments, there's a lot of discussions around new instruments, and yes, that may be needed as well for the scale, but also, and this goes back to one of the presentations that was made on the pension funds. You mentioned the huge amounts of assets under management by the pensions and the small percentage of those assets that's actually needed. I think we have to view it from the investor side, where they have beneficiaries themselves to provide and fulfill. So you have to look at it from the risk return perspective of these institutional investors. And one of the areas that we are trying to look into is what can we utilize within the existing portfolios and existing risk returns, but with innovative thinking to address these large and big issues. So I think it's a mix of existing frameworks and existing instruments for innovative thinking, plus possibly new instruments to catalyze greater funds from others who are not investing or don't have that risk return.
Monica, that was excellent. And also thanks to you and your team who provided feedback to the report's earlier drafts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now I turn to my colleague from SIF, Paul.
Thanks very much. Hi all. It's been very interesting to see the outcomes of the mapping, and it is very timely, helping fill a knowledge gap in this space. Just wanted to touch on a couple of points. On the background of climate investment funds, we've been piloting and scaling climate solutions and innovations in low and middle income countries since 2008. And we have been working on facilitating cooperation between governments as well as the private sector in commercializing clean technologies and business models. And so we are now moving toward launching a new industry decarbonization program, which recognizes the opportunity to shift high-emitting industries, especially such as those focused on in the subsectors in this report, steel, cement, chemicals, etc. So it'll build on the sort of leadership role that we play in the climate finance space, delivering targeted, innovative concessional financing, as well as collaborating with our MDB partners. So this will drive investments at multiple levels. At the industrial facilities, it'll help in terms of scaling technologies, as well as building policies, etc., at both national, subnational, as well as global levels. And we're expected to capitalize at over $500 million, and we're looking to launch it later this year with an average co-financing ratio of 1:8. And we do acknowledge the lack of diversification in financing and tools. And our industrial decarbonization platform aims to do just that by catalyzing financing from several actors, including the private sector, as we've done in several of our earlier programs. Essentially, we aim to provide a holistic financial toolkit, which ranges across a lot of those flagged in this report, so grants and TA, as well as concessional loans. And we are looking to work more closely with NCFs on these decarbonization efforts moving forward. Let me close it at that, but happy to take more questions. Thanks for responding in the chat earlier. Our team is happy to provide written feedback as well during these review rounds. And thanks again for all the great efforts.
Thank you, Paul, also for giving this comprehensive overview. What I find very interesting in this report is obviously when it comes to industry decarbonization related assistance, obviously public sources are considered as a sort of a given, as the priority. But this report delved into actually 2 additional sources, one being the institutional investors, which we've heard from Monica on their priorities and needs. But there's also the philanthropies. So that's a new an emerging segment, but also which has been active for many years, which the results of this work has shown. I see the Climate Works Foundation here in the room, and if they would like to add from their perspective on how philanthropic assistance could be scaled up and targeting the industry decarbonization and what the priorities are from the philanthropy side, that would be very interesting to hear. But of course, if anyone else wants to answer to that, very welcomed.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm happy to chat from the philanthropy side of it. Sorry, everyone, it's still pretty early here on the West Coast. So in philanthropy, it was interesting when you shared the slide. You'd mentioned, that most of the funding is not going toward actual decarbonization projects, which is correct. Like we don't. I don't see that necessarily as philanthropy's role in financing like big, capital projects. But we are interested in supporting, as mentioned, universities and the NGO network to support basically the network to get that finance going and to get that moving. At ClimateWorks, we are focusing on the three main areas: steel, chemical, and cement. I think something we're looking at really is how to engage more with EMDEs. I think that's something that maybe people in this room could support us with. But actually, I feel like we have strong networks in East Asia, in Europe, in North America, of the civil service societies who are doing the work to get public financing passed or to get private financing moving. But I don't know if we necessarily have those same connections in EMDEs. So I think being able to build those relationships with civil society and NGOs in those regions would be really helpful for us. I do know we are also working very hard to increase the amount of philanthropic funding for industrial decarbonization. As mentioned, it's like less than 3% of all climate philanthropic funding. We are expecting that number to go up soon, but certainly not in the magnitude of what the challenge presents. I'll stop for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this, and of course the work done by the Climate Works is very valuable and was also input or part of the input to this work as well. Now, before I turn to the Climate Club member governments, I'd like to ask Cecile if she wants to reflect on any of the points we've heard.
No, first of all, thank you for all the insight. I think that there is a common understanding and conclusion on the fact that yes, more is needed, more diversification, more targeted way. And also interesting to hear yes, different perspectives from different stakeholders. But I think that in the end, yes, the conclusion is really about how to scale up. So this is what we heard from many stakeholders, how to scale up the assistance and try to unlock this kind of deep decarbonization project, but also here that we also see that every stakeholder has his role to play and can contribute from different ways. So I think that really interesting to hear different views, specifically in the sense of international partnership, as we were saying at the beginning, under the Pillar 3. So thank you very much.
Super, thank you, Cecile. Now, another set of questions. These are more targeting the member governments, and we have participation from 11 countries. There were more, some colleagues had to leave, but in the room we have colleagues from Austria, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, the European Commission, Italy, Peru, United Kingdom, Ukraine, and Uruguay. And we have a number of questions which we would like to hear your views about. First of all, the report points to quite a number of important findings. First of all, where assistance is being targeted, in which amount, for which areas, sectors, technologies. And the question is to those members who are also involved in multilateral or bilateral assistance to EMDs, and based on these findings, how they see increasing their focus and scaling up assistance to industry decarbonization. So if there are views on this from those countries who are involved in this type of assistance, we will be very happy to hear and collect inputs. Please again, raise your hands. While I wait for those who might be thinking for some responses, where I see my colleague from Canada, Isabel, raising her hand. Please go ahead.
Hi, colleagues. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, happy to share a few reflections and really thankful for the presentation and the insights that were shared. I'm Isabel Turcot, and I work for the Canadian government in a department that has a fund to promote industrial innovation and decarbonization. And what I'm hearing really resonates here. So I just thought I'd highlight a few points where we had a couple years ago put out a call for proposal for large decarbonization projects, and we've had a lot of struggles to get projects that were actually mature enough, so close to making a final investment decision to match with our timelines. So sort of there was the reality that was kind of disappointing there in terms of the project readiness and building a strong pipeline. The scale of investment needed for decarbonizing steel and cement projects is challenging for the government. And so we're also seeing a challenge around, we have carbon pricing in Canada, but there's uncertainty around whether or not it will survive a federal election, which should happen in a year and a half. And despite this uncertainty, there's also the issue of the certainty of the credits that folks can generate in the carbon pricing regime. That's been really, really challenging, and it's been it has stopped folks from making the investment. Luckily, and I think that's proving to be effective for some projects. We're now using carbon contracts for difference. So we have a few deals in Canada that have been created by the Canada Growth Fund that include equity and carbon contracts for difference. But the issue here will be, can we cover the demand here for carbon contracts for difference? Finally, and this is I guess just a reality that's going to be hard to contend with. On the one side, the IRA in the US was extremely good news, but for us, it also creates a lot of competition where we're seeing companies shop around for where can they get the best support. And so there's just this fear around losing the investments here. And then maybe a last point is we're also trying to figure out how can we help to create on the procurement side solutions to kind of unlock a price that's more appealing for cement and steel. So I'll leave it there and keen to hear other colleagues' comments. Thank you so much.
Very helpful, very crisp, and with very nice examples. So thank you very much for that. That helps a lot for this discussion. Thank you. I see also more colleagues from the Climate Club member governments, if they would like to contribute to this discussion, as Canada just did. So please feel free to raise your hand. Okay, maybe we can look at the second question. What can, in principle, Climate Club, together with members, could do? And this is a bit of a more strategic question. We'll, of course, discuss this next week on 3rd of July meeting. But I think some of the IFIs here may also want to hear your views. In order to increase the availability of financial and technical assistance, what can, as the interim secretariat, as the climate club, with the members, what type of actions we can take on the basis of this work to close this gap of financing industry decarbonization? If there are any views on that, that is one question. And then another one is about the relevance of this work and its continuation. So already, while Cecile was presenting, IFC colleagues have asked, is there more recent data? And yes, definitely, we see Climate Club fulfilling a gap to annually monitor this assistance, to see what type of assistance is going where, which country, for which purpose. And is this something, as the Climate Club member governments, you also find relevant, but also any other stakeholder? Is this type of monitoring we should continue in the future as well? That's another question, and I stop here. If there are any views, please, any suggestions, please feel free to raise your hand. Okay, so maybe at the benefit of the time, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item. We will be discussing all these together with the members on the 3rd of July Climate Club meeting. So we have some more time for preparation, but nevertheless, thank you for already brainstorming. Now, my colleagues from UNIDO are present. Ricardo, who is also managing the team at UNIDO site as the Secretariat of the Global Matchmaking Platform, which as the OECD and IEA sides of the Climate Club Interim Secretariat, very happy to work with, and I leave the floor to him for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dege. Thank you, Interim Secretariat. And I would like to thank all the participants because I'm finding this session extremely interesting. And then I would like to thank, of course, the report. I mean, the colleagues here was, let's say, presented the report, but all the comments, again, as I said, extremely fascinating. And my name is Riccardo Savigliano. I work at UNIDO in the division called Energy System Industrial Decarbonization Unit, and we are hosting, as mentioned by Dege, the Secretariat of the Global Matchmaking Platform. Next slide, please. The platform has been presented also from the let's say inputs before. I would like just to highlight the areas of support because I think, I mean, the rest and what and how has been already covered, but the area of support, what we think is going to be the type of supports that the global matchmaking platform is going to address. And actually, those 2 points are elements that have been, let's say, mentioned and highlighted in previous, let's say, statements from different representatives. So the GMP is looking into 2 type of area support. One in looking into the kind of ecosystem, in particular the policy development, roadmaps, all the type of support that countries would need to set up rules, let's say, for the decarbonization to happen, including also MRV systems, push and pull at the level of market, and so on and so forth, standards, incentives, etc. On the other hand, the other area of support that we believe the platform will address is the facilitation to investments and technology deployment, including also pre-feasibility studies, investment proposal, de-risking the de-risking instruments for finance mechanism, technology options, and so on and so forth. There we are looking into also breakthrough technologies and approaches, and some of them have been also again mentioned earlier. So the idea of the matchmaking platform is to get the requests from countries and get at the international level the answer and the support on what is already existing in the short term. But we also believe that such a platform, and actually from the comment we received, we could also look into that with a little bit of optimism. In the medium long term, we could also help the let's say the debate in leveraging new financial instruments to shape the financial instruments towards industrial decarbonization. Next slide, please. So, for the purpose of this audience, we put three of the main services that the platform is going to provide, and the potential impact to your actually operation. On one side, the service would be to help countries to screen their requests and actually help them to elaborate their requests. And then we believe that that would help in getting and identifying solid pipelines to reduce transaction costs in the medium long term. Second service is to the GMP will try to trigger cooperation, coordination at sectorial level, bringing different partners and key stakeholders in the around the request, and that would give additional, let's say, boost to scale up, and that's another element that has been also mentioned before: the need to be at scale, no? to be at programmatic level. And last but not least, the platform will also look into solid political will and solid ambition from governments in filling, let's say, regulatory gaps that could trigger financial investments. And I think that long-term planning in terms of policy support would give some clarity to investors. Next slide. I will go through that very quickly because it's something that I guess will be shared, so you can see where we stand. The GMP started from an idea in October that was developed and launched at the COP28. We are in a piloting phase. We are setting up the scene, including also at UNIDO, finalizing the team, joining the platform, the secretariat, and we are planning to be ready by COP29 with a full-fledged platform, fully operational, to be live globally. So we are piloting it in 5 countries: Argentina, Brazil, Indonesia, Kenya, and Morocco. Those are 4 Climate Club countries because, for the, let's say, we started from some, let's say, easier situation, but of course also Brazil is not part of the Climate Club. So we are together with those governments getting, as I say, the mechanisms ready to be deployed at the global level. And just I want to drive your attention to what we are planning for September. And I think, I mean, there, correct me if I'm wrong, but from the meeting we are, in the feedback we are having today, I think, I mean, that meeting in September could be actually very useful. And we don't really know exactly what, but the idea would be to have maybe a dedicated session for the interested representative from IFIs and potential donors to have a closer look into the mechanism of the GMP before we go live, because again, this instrument we believe will be an instrument for governments, but also for investors. So the idea is, the GMP to play in between the different needs. Let's say, as I say, governments, donors, and actors around the technology transfer and the policy update. And with that, I would conclude there to the last slide, and we will stand ready to address any comments, if any. Back to you, Dagger. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Ricardo. And I'm sure there will be questions now. So I open the floor for any clarifications we might do, any questions we might answer from countries or from non-governments. I see one hand from Colombia, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation and the presentation of the study. I have some comments previous and from this part also. I think it's important, it would be useful to design longer support and accompaniment process may be necessary to meet the requirements and the case studies for financing these projects, taking into account they are very expensive for industry in the country. It would be also maybe important to work hand by hand with the governments in the complete project cycle. As mentioned before, maybe to develop other mechanisms and incentives that help the industry to advance in a complete case of this transformation of local industry, and also to work with governments in terms of identifying benefits in terms of productive development, industrialization, other economic, social, and environmental co-benefits of the decarbonization of the industry. So it can be analyzed as a whole and not only as a private effort. For example, in Colombia, Colombia was one of the 4 pilots worldwide and the first in Latin America to accept the challenge of the Global Cement and Concrete Association to develop the roadmap towards carbon neutrality. So it would be very interesting to analyze if there's the opportunity to work within the Climate Club to support the advance of this roadmap. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Arakona. I think this was very helpful for a number of reasons. It also showcases how different countries are advancing in their planning for industry decarbonization for steel and cement sectors, but how also the work of Climate Club could support to operationalize or create the implementation of these. Maybe one small note from the work program of Climate Club, the second module of the 3rd pillar is overviewing best practices, case studies on financing industry decarbonization projects, which we are collecting evidence from all around the world. So we will be sharing that as we progress with this group, and that also provides an input to the global matchmaking platform, to the UNIDO work. Any questions to Ricardo? Otherwise, I'll move on with the closing part of this meeting. Of course, you can reach out to him by his email as well. It was displayed on the screen. So we are also happy to put you in touch. Okay, thank you very much to this very rich participation and the good discussion. This was the second meeting of today on the same topic. We already had another one in the morning, Central European time. And the conclusions from both sessions actually point to the same point. We asked the question about how to close the financing gap. We asked the question about how to scale up finance to different actors. And many of you mentioned the importance of enabling conditions as a precondition to assistance, because that makes it more viable, more realistic to mobilize, unlike private capital, because that's eventually what we are aiming for: commercial investments, effects on demonstration, creating lighthouse projects. And then comes the public finance part and de-risking part, let's say, which we understand from also this work that many different IFIs are using various instruments for this. So the other conclusion was also that industry decarbonization is costly, yes. First, the assistance should be focusing on the enabling conditions to de-risk as much as possible, create that confidence for the investors to invest in these projects, and then the assistance from financing will be equally important to build on that once the enabling conditions are set. And the global matchmaking platform of the Climate Club, run by the UNIDO, provides the excellent opportunity, first of all, to coordinate assistance as a platform that is available from different sources, as the mapping report have shown, but also to respond to these different needs with a long, let's say, shopping list, whether in the form of technical assistance or financial assistance. And we very much look forward to working with the countries, whether if it's a beneficiary country or if it's a country that will be providing assistance through this platform in the coming years. We'll be sharing the outcomes of this meeting with everyone, and those who are interested in the report, please reach out to us. We'll be sharing the report for your feedback. And as I mentioned, this recorded session will also be displayed on the Climate Club webpage. And with this, I'd like to close this meeting, thanking my colleagues Cecile and Amidia for the excellent work, and to Akiko, Michael, and Yosha from the Interim Secretariat for the organizational aspects of this meeting, and to my colleagues Ricardo and Barbara from the UNIDO, the GMP Secretariat. And look forward to the next sessions. Thank you, and have a good day, good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.